So there's a question before us: how do we deal with praise, assuming that we are reacting to praise in a way that doesn't benefit us? But when people praise us, is there any beneficial thing to us? And I would say yes. Because we have to deal with all kinds of levels and all kinds of situations. Is it useful to praise children, colleagues, people? Yes. What do you think? Do we all require praise? It seems we do. So in the early stages of our development, why don't we take it in the spirit that is given? On the basis that we're all individuals with individual talents and abilities. Everyone is completely unique. Like a jigsaw puzzle, we all fit in together. We all have our unique combination of talents and abilities. That when we use them in conjunction with dharma, that is the complete harmony of things, then we are obliged to put our small unique contribution. This is the key to why we are individuals. There's no absolute necessity that our DNA should be completely different, and yet it is. Our fingerprints are different, our DNA is different. The structure of the inner cell has a completely different identification pattern. And yet the potential that's stored within it is immense. Something like a 1,000-volume encyclopedia is contained in one small cell of the human body. So all your potential, whatever you were, whatever you are, whatever you will be, is simply contained in that one small cell. That's all you require. Just to unravel your potential in one cell. It holds the key to everything. So we should tap into it, and if praise encourages it, so be it. But at a certain point, do we require it? At a certain point, do children require it? Is that a motivating factor for them? I'll only do something if I get praised. I won't do something if I get blamed. And so we have to transcend praise and blame together. Any pairs of opposites, described physically as hot and cold, psychologically praise and blame, ambitiously success or failure, even virtue and vice. What is that beyond virtue, beyond vice? Is a question asked of the deity Yam by Nachiketa. What is that stands beyond that? So that's in the Katha Upanishad. So what is beyond dharma, adharma? What is beyond this time and space and the familiar universe that we know of? Something has to be there. And when we catch on to that, then our point of view may change a little bit. And then we come to the point of what is the main obstacle? What is standing in the way of a drive toward perfection? Anything that stands in its way is described and defined as evil. What is evil? Something that stands in the way of our main purpose, which is divine. We have a divine purpose. That means in every daily activity, we have to be aware what distractions are useful to us. And if we come to a conclusion that a distraction, by definition, is something that takes us away from a central purpose, that also is defined as evil. We're not talking of evil in the sense of morality, immorality, that kind of thing. No. Simple as this. We have a central purpose in life. If we pursue it with utmost energy and vigor, it's a short circuit. We get there very directly. All the other things become delaying things. And why should we employ delaying tactics? So we apply this in every sphere of life, every avenue of life. Whatever activity you're doing in your daily work is simply toward this central purpose. Why else would it be there? It may not seem as if it's there. It may not seem as being relevant at all to anything spiritual until we understand that why you are existing is a central question. Then anything that is not encouraging, moving, directing you, making the flow easy toward the central goal, will be a distraction. So when we ask a question such as, what's distracting the mind? And if we take praise as a way of putting an obstacle there for us, connected with our central purpose, then we have to deal with it. But the beginning stages of things look very different. And to go directly to some higher entity, some transcendent truth, will not be convenient. It won't be useful because it won't be easy and natural. Step by step, the phrase is we have to learn to walk before we run. And even before that, we have to learn to crawl. And even before that, we have to learn to transfer our body posture from the back to the front. So anybody who studies how babies grow up will see very clearly that you can't just get up and run, no matter what the parents' expectation is. The parents get very often impatient. Why is my child not speaking? Leave the child alone, the child will speak naturally enough. See, it will want to express itself. Now, supposing we have a whole list of activities that we need to do and revalue them in this light, that they are intrinsically before us on our plate because the way we deal with it is contributing toward an easy flow toward our central purpose, some avenue whereby we can have a realization of our continued inner perfection. Then we might have a different attitude toward what we have to do, the approach with which we use to deal with it, and the level of concentration we apply to it. So, very often the human impulse is, there are things we like to do and things we don't like to do. More accurately, there are things that please the mind and things that displease the mind. It seems that praise pleases the mind. It seems that blame and criticism doesn't please the mind so much. So we have to dissociate from this idea. Maybe the mind can be directed in a different way. It's not an independent entity. It's more like an instrument. So if it's something like an instrument, and I'm not that, then I should be able to tune it. I should be able to direct it. I should be able to halt it. And when I direct it, I should be able to direct it in a way that is compatible with scriptural directions. All scripture is not directed against making things better. It's not directed at God, please make things better. It's directed at man, please do this, please don't do that, with this assumption that we can momentarily stop the flow of our attention and stem it for a while and direct it in a chosen way. So all scripture is based on that. And if we can do it just for a moment, all scripture assumes we can do it for a moment. All moral teachings say we can change the course of things at least for a moment. Or, in other words, take this beam, which we call attention, and switch it off and turn the direction and beam it on a different object. You can take it from the world and all its concerns, stop it for a moment, redirect it to something more useful, turn the beam on and pursue it in a chosen way. There's a huge debate between what is free will, what is not free will, and so on. And the other day we were reading passage. There's a section on freedom, which is contained in the series of talks that Swami gives on Karma Yoga. Anybody who wants to master the art of work and attention will really have to study these lectures on Karma Yoga. It's very useful. But in particular, this idea of free will comes up in that particular lecture. Because it's an internal debate, since the Greek times even, and beyond, about this question of, firstly, is everything, if there's a causal law that operates in this life, in this world, is everything then hopelessly caused. And we have to deal with the effects, a kind of fatalism. But then there's a story of a student who held this position, held this idea. We're all destined in a certain way, helplessly destined. The teacher said, all right, I want to give you some daily instruction today. First thing is, please repeat all the numbers up to 1012. Faithfully, the student repeats it, takes some time till 112. Next thing, can you repeat all the letters of the alphabet and then repeat them backwards? He does it faithfully. Why did you do all that? Student says, because you told me to do it. I see. So you're not actually a helpless robot-like machine. They're programmed and destined to do a certain thing. You can change the course of things at any moment in time. Of course, you may argue, well, the cause was you instructed me, and the cause of me following it was I reverenced you as a teacher, and the cause of that might be I see some merit or benefit in it, something like that. Those chunks means we take a unit activity and we don't steer our attention toward anything else, and we realize that that chunk is necessary before the next thing can occur, and the next thing can occur. And we put all our concentration into that one unit activity, and planning also helps. That means assessing that unit activity, how long might it take? Just that step, how long might it take? And then whatever figure you come up with is probably underestimated. So you put a contingency on the activity. Contingency on the activity means that you now have an extra budget. That budget will cater for unexpected interruptions on the one side and a natural tendency to underestimate the time factor. We become very optimistic when we view how activities work. It's a bit like somebody who has a desire to play a musical instrument and in their head plays a whole concert. And then is under the delusion that when they pick up an instrument, even though they've only had rudimentary lessons in music, and assume that they can play more efficiently and in a more skilled way than they actually can. So we all tend to estimate the amount of time we require to do an activity, and there's no doubt there will be unexpected interruptions that we didn't cater for. So on the Enneagram course I told people, painted a scenario that really there's a plot against us. So here's some practical suggestions. When you write down, and we assume that all your activities are written down. So whatever work you have, you do a planning thing. Planning means, to make it more efficient, it's recommended you do it weekly, daily and monthly. Monthly planning, you probably go to around about the 26th of the month, that is before the month ends, and start filling in your calendar for the next month. And then every week, the skeleton that you've put in there as monthly planning will get filled in with weekly activities. Let's say a Friday afternoon or something like that. Then you put in your weekly activities for the following week. And then every day you fill in your activities. The daily planning now becomes scheduling. And scheduling means that every hour, every half hour is accounted for.
The only issue with that is that when kids are in the picture,
sure,
planning.
Sure, but you see, if it's if you're at the workplace, this is a standard thing for the workplace. Mm. I don't suggest you plan your domestic life in this way. That's something different. But having said that, if your business life is carrying over to your domestic life, then you have to plan for family time like that, and you have to plan for planning time. Planning itself requires a scheduled slot to do the planning. So the first thing that appears on your daily schedule will be maybe 30 minutes daily planning or weekly planning. Planning has to be there. If that's not itself in the schedule, it's not going to happen. What has that got to do with spirituality? It's to take this resource, which is really a manifestation of God's grace, called thought, the capacity to plan, the capacity to steer our attention, the capacity to halt it and redirect it, the capacity to use this antakarana, this internal instrument, in a way that drives us toward, with this urge of perfection behind it, drives us toward that. So, all work becomes sacred to us. And if all work is sacred, there's no discrimination then between I like this activity, I don't like this activity. This distinction goes away because is it preferable to, in worship, is it preferable to offer a flower or a water or say prayers or light a lamp, which is the one, they're all preferable because they're all done as a sacred activity. And there's no sequence other than, unless it's a logical sequence, that if you want to light an incense stick, then you better light a lamp first. But you do it mindfully. And so pacing yourself is important because one of the distractions in spiritual life will be mental stress. We do away with the mental stress when things become ordered. That is, we use God's grace appearing as a framework called time. And we attend to things in this way, one thought per second, one activity per minute, that kind of thing. And so how long will it take us to do an activity? Don't value it in hours, value it in minutes. Don't say 2 hours, say 120 minutes. The minute is your currency for activity. Your second is your currency for thought. So knowing that has an overall effect on stress. Too much to do with not enough resource in terms of time. And we can only do what we can manage doing. If you have a whole activity that can be broken down into a number of sub-activities, you start off by estimating how long does this take overall. If I was to do it continuously without a break, how long would it take? That is, with no understanding of day, night or anything, how long would it take? How many hours would it take? In that overall time assessment, you then add a contingency. A healthy contingency. If you've never done an activity before, 100% contingency is necessary. So a healthy contingency, let's say 25% contingency of time, then that overall lump of time you then break down on whatever is manageable, weekly, daily, whatever it is. So much toward it. It goes toward it. Then what happens once you've completed the activity? What do you think? What do you think is a really useful thing to do? Bearing in mind that the whole of this, whether it's physical activity, psychological activity, the whole thing is essentially psychological activity. The whole thing involves intention. The whole thing involves will, planning, deciding. And it's necessary that that internal aspect becomes purified, becomes full of positivity. So in order to encourage that, after every unit activity, why don't you offer it Godwards? Step 1, finished. Lord, please accept it. At the end of the day, Lord, you're the executive officer of me incorporated. So here's the unit activity. It may not be perfect, but I did my best and put all my God-given energy into it. All the thing that you supplied, I transferred it and transformed it into writing, into opinionating, into speaking, into physical activity, mental activity. Just one current of grace, divinely supplied, which doesn't have a beginning and never has an end. It's all attitude. So most people will find it more convenient to have an approach which is emotionally based. We call it Bhakti Yoga. I'm not saying it's so for everybody. The vast majority of people want a separate entity of a God and with a worship process going on. It's not to say that we have to have that all the time. In Vedanta we can choose to have it as a tool when required. But we have another option, and that is to see the non-dualistic aspect of things also. And when we see the non-dualistic aspect of things, when things become difficult, bringing this instrument out makes things look different and solves many problems. It brings out an extra dimension, a creative dimension. So we can start off from any beginner's stance. Lord, you are the provider of everything. The thankfulness should be there. Theoretically, our talk today should have been being graceful, but we're deviating from the subject in order to attend to personal questions. But still we can't avoid the subject because everything that comes to us, be it of the physical variety, the emotional variety, the psychological variety, everything that arrives at this instrumentation which we call antakarana, internal instrument. And everything around us, the environment that it responds to, is none other than God's grace. Well, what is grace? Grace means something that is freely flowing without any demand for return. And interestingly enough, during the night, for somehow I came to the idea that most of us do not bask in the glory that we call God. And when we talk of love of God, which is now the subject has become all of a sudden, some things are required. Put it on the board here. See? So, first of all, there's a kind of revelation that is necessary. We have to see the world with different eyes. When we have an eye for the divine within everything, it becomes revealed to us. And then we recognize that entity in all kinds of names and forms, beginning with waveforms, and waveforms initially within us that arise as thoughts. What we call thoughts are waves. We didn't ask for them. They came up and it was supplied to us. So when we recognize that divinity in the hand's activities, in the capacity to think, in all the particular skills that are particularly ours, then that's a kind of recognition that takes place. But then we have to be in a receiving position. You heard the phrase, receiving God's grace. It's like the sunbeams are there, and before we know it or understand it, we have received them. Even the light from the sun, even though it comes 8 minutes late, we receive it, we don't question it. But to be a willing recipient is something different. To recognize, to understand and acknowledge God's grace is flowing. Then we can become a delightful recipient. It means we can be, in theistic terms, it means we can allow ourselves to be loved by God. What a beautiful idea. Allow myself to be loved and nurtured by God, particularly with some personality types. What will I have to do? Let me allow myself to be loved. That's all I have to do. What does a baby have to do? Allows themselves to be picked up and carried. Allow themselves to be changed when they soil. Allow themselves to be fed. That's all they have to do. And there are so many aspects that we pose ourselves in when we talk of love of God. Child can be one, child toward the parents. Or why don't we become, if we understand that, why don't we actually become children? Lord, you carry me. Lord, this is all yours. A kind of surrender attitude, not resignation attitude. That's different. But a surrender attitude that says, I'm willing to accept all the glory and grace that flows my way. And this word grace is a peculiar word because it's also related to gracias, gratis, gratia, see, thankfulness. So we start off with the spirit of thankfulness, all our activities. And so receptivity is there. Then what do we call love of God? What do we call bhakti? What do we call worship? It's just responding or reciprocating the love that is flowing to us. Why should we love God? Because God is lovable. But we have to recognize that. We have to understand that. We have to tune into that. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says the wind of God's grace is ever blowing. It's not that we have to look for it. It's not that we have to search for it. It's not that we have to make an application for it. It's already there. And so finally, the last step of this bhakti is an internal rapture that takes place. Some internal upsurge that carries us. At that point, do you think there's any morsel of negativity? Nothing. It's all positive. Not just positive, but joyful. See, the word rapture, where the breath gets suspended. A kind of internal ecstasy takes place. So that's seems to me that is a kind of profile that we have of this idea of love. Love of God and tuning into God's grace. Now through God's grace, through divine grace, something arrived in your area that you have to deal with. Through God's grace you have the ability and skill and capacity to deal with it. Through God's grace you apply it. Through God's grace you return it to its rightful owner and give at the end of the day an executive report. Lord, this is what I did with your supplied energy. With this idea that the internal instrument is tuned in the same way as a mobile phone is tuned into the radio waves traveling through the electromagnetic atmosphere. What do you call it? Electromagnetic field. It's being carried there. We don't have to deliberately look for it. It is already there. Tuning into it. Constantly tuning into it. So what do we mean by offering it? Offering it means tuning into that eternal presence which is still here and registering all your activities in the correct way. Lord, this is yours. I have no business with it. I can't claim anything for it. Same thing with praise and blame. It's not a structured thing. It's wrong to accept praise and not to feel humble. It's not about rules and regulations. This is right, that is right. No, nothing to do with that. See, it's about, all right, if I feel puffed up and proud because somebody lavished praise on me, a human condition, no doubt. But we have to transcend that human condition by a better point of view that says, actually, it wasn't me. It had nothing to do with me. It was all borrowed energy. And the Lord was generous enough to say, yeah, you can claim it for your own if you choose. Of course it won't do you any good, because it won't get you to the truth. What is this internal instrument designed to do? Access truth. About what? Truth about anything. This room has 4 walls. That's a truthful position. It requires my internal instrument to register within a space some dimensional aspect that is appreciated by the mind. 4 walls are there. But other impressions are there too. Things are impinging on the skin. Taste sensations might be there. Other things might be there. 100 things might be there. But why would I highlight the walls? Is because, fortunately for us, as a manifestation of God's grace, this internal instrument is only capable of tuning into one thing at a time. So in practical life, when you have all these activities, one thing at a time, make your mantra. How many things do you have to do? 101, there's thousands of things. No. You only have one thing to do, and then another thing, and then another thing. Don't worry about all the other things. That creates anxiety and tension and stress. Do the one thing. Do it well. Do it as a flower offering, with the full knowledge that the capacity to do it comes from God's grace. And the result of it is a continuation of it also.
Swamiji, can I say something? I understand the concept of it, but I can give an example. So if I realize that I'm just an instrument and it's God's grace flowing through me, how I can get misled. For example, I can't focus right now. God's grace hasn't come yet, or I'm waiting for inspiration and I can keep on waiting and nothing happens. I need to act at some point. I may say, I'm not inspired yet.
Waiting is not an activity.
Yes, but there is this notion of sometimes I feel very focused and sometimes I don't, and I can mislead myself thinking that it's not yet there, let me wait, maybe something improves, but I can wait for a long time.
There was somebody I knew who was the chief executive of a business. Actually, it wasn't a business, it was a mine. He was a managing director of a mine. And whenever he was seen walking, everybody would be busy. Prior to that, they may have been doing like this, because when they first encountered him, he asked them, "What are you doing?" And they say, "We're waiting for instructions or waiting for this waiting." He says, "Waiting is not an activity," and he gave them something to do. So they made sure that they were occupied or looked occupied at least whenever he was there. See. So waiting for inspiration, that's an interesting one. See, I wrote a whole series of poems once, and I asked a particular person who was particularly artistic, particularly talented in painting. I said, "Let's publish a book together. I'll write the poems here. I can also paint, but let's employ your unique talent. Get the spirit of the poem, as it were, and see if you can make a picture of that, colored picture. And then, so you poem on the one side and the painting on the other side. We publish a book like that. So we have the written word there, and we have the beautiful visual embodiment of it. Now that was a number of years ago. I'm still waiting. So, because that person was waiting for the inspiration to do it. And when they put that person in the grave, no doubt they'll still be waiting for it. So waiting is not an activity. There's a time to do it, and that time is now. Do it now. Not when you're in the mood. All you're saying is, I don't really like this activity.
It's just that certain types of activities require full focus of the brain and others don't.
Yes.
So it's much easier to say, it's not like I'm waiting and doing nothing, but it's much easier to drift and doing things that don't require full focus.
Yes, which is another thing, and that is, you see, it's the same thing that I prefer to do the distracted things, and this is a little daunting, and it requires more effort and more concentration, and so I won't do it. I'll complain about it, that I haven't got the energy or the time or the inclination, if I'm honest. Well, we get past that, you see, but there are techniques. And it's the same as in meditation itself, that we don't just launch into meditation. Most people who teach meditation will say, no, you have to make some preparation for it. Make sure that the place is quiet. So go and sit in a quiet place. Don't sit in a noisy place. If your activity requires extreme concentration, it's not recommended that you do it in Starbucks. So find an excluded place, some quiet thing. Sometimes a little music helps. So many psychologists will say that Baroque music assists concentration. Make sure that the body feels alert. So make sure that you have some water, because any stressful thought will produce a physical effect of dehydration. So rehydrate, make sure there's lots of water then. there beside you. Then make sure that you know what is your objective and write it down, so that you always have that in mind. Then do a planning process. Find out, this is an activity, and how long will it take if I did it from end to end. Put your contingency on. Then break it down and schedule it into time slots. And during those time slots, at the beginning of the activity, unit activity, you dedicate it, make a dedication. Using your energy, let me tune the mind into you. All flow that we call concentration belongs to you. Let it be so. And then, if that is too broad a thing, each unit activity should have its particular objective and intention. I'm doing this today. Why am I doing it? What do I want to accomplish? And then, many people will say, make a kind of self-congratulation once you've finished. We'll come back to your issue of praise. So let there be praise. Obviously not self-praise, you didn't do anything. But praise and thanks for the ever-flowing grace that permitted it. See, I selected this passage here. This is from the Mundaka Upanishad. It's a very beautiful passage because it starts off, Purusha eva Vishwamidam. See, Purusha alone is all this. So we've gone from offering something to a dualistic Lord, and then broadening it and creating a much more mature position. Make a starting position, everything has to have a starting position. But our final conclusion in Vedanta is, you, this divine entity, the source of this grace called thought and activity and energy, you alone are all this. All this means, when we say this, it's with a dramatic sweep of the hand to say all the things that we observe in the observable universe, all the things that are around us with people and places and events, all these scenes, everything that is other than this internal Purusha. So Purusha alone is all this, all what? All that is comprised of karma, cause and effect and activity, and knowledge. And he who knows this supremely immortal Brahman, equating it to Purusha as an indweller entity within something like a city, designated as 11-gated city by Kathopanishad, as existing in the heart, the innermost source of your being, destroys what and when? Destroys here, in this very moment, the knot of ignorance. Ignorance being equated to obscuring knowledge and creating delaying factors for us. It's not that we have to go and get anything. It's already here. You just have to remove whatever it is here. And the instrument for doing this is this antahkarana, this capacity to take a laser beam, or to take all the distracted areas of scatteredness and concentrating it into something like a laser and decidedly beaming it in a specific direction. So during that unit activity, where you have selected an environment, you've selected a time. A suitable time means some people find their best concentration moments in the morning, sometimes in the evening, sometimes noon. Select what is the best conducive to your concentration. And switch your telephone off. There's another problem today. Your mobile, somebody rings, immediately, impulsively, somebody takes it. I also did it. I stopped the camera rolling to take a call, but it was an important call. I phoned in this morning. So our modern technology is nicely designed for us either to be a supreme distraction and create a lack of concentration, or it can be used as an efficient tool. The mind is the same thing. The mind can be used as an efficient tool, or it can be distraction. You know the old joke, you see, mindful. See? There are two ways of mindfulness. It can be either mindful, or it can be mindful. The mind is full of all kinds of nonsense. And it's up to us. But we have to take personal responsibility for it, of course. So I was saying at the Enneagram, I was giving a joke. See, whether you know it or not, there is a plot. And I think it's the same plot against me as it is against you. I think it's a plot against members of the Revaluing Society. Because, you see, what happens when you are in a hurry to do something? Let's say there's a very important meeting. When you leave the premises, immediately, and I think it's because there are secret CCTVs around, that goes to a central office. And they say, the Swami is leaving now. And when that happens, all the roadsworks department come out. And they come out in front of the planned route, see. And then they have a central communication, see, to the traffic department of the city to say, okay, when you see this registration, car registration number, please turn all the traffic lights red. All the traffic lights get red. And then a traffic jam organized 2 roads down. Like that, you see. Until hopelessly you're late. Now, of course, there are several ways of dealing with it. One is not really dealing with it, but allowing mounting tension to arise at every obstacle with the idea, oh, what a pity I'm late. And you get frustrated, possibly a heart attack. Anger will come up. And whoa, who will you blame? You will blame all those people I mentioned. The hidden people that control the traffic lights. The stupid roads department that puts holes in the way and fills them in. Every week they do it the same. And then all the traffic that decided to converge on my personal road and stop me from being timely. Or I could say, I see, I should leave earlier in order to buffer any difficult situations and make a contingency plan. I should leave in plenty of time. Now when I do that, miraculously what happens? They communicate, oh, Swami has a different attitude today. All the traffic lights are green. All the roads department, where are you? No, they took a holiday today. It's very peculiar. Not very many cars on the road today. See? So it depends on our own attitude. We have to take personal responsibility for taking this antakarana, and in the words of the Bhagavad Gita, raising ourselves up by ourselves, not lowering ourselves by ourselves. That means not dragging the mind down into a negative, pessimistic and despondent attitude that gets compiled and combined and increased by internal conversations. Because all of us have the internal conversations accompanying the thinking. Oh, this is difficult. I'm not ready to do this. I need a quiet moment. The children are a distraction. When will I find the time? And mounting tension because a deadline may be drawing closer. And how will I manage this? So, stepping back, doing systematic planning, arranging a quiet place, particularly finding out what is your objective, turning off all distracting mechanisms such as mobile phone and so on. If it's helpful, play a little quiet music and enjoy the process in a scheduled, marked, paced way. 2 people run a marathon and one person gets exhausted quickly. It's a common thing, you see, if you see in a long marathon race, a section of people dart off with great enthusiasm and energy, and then you watch for them at the finish line, they're nowhere to be seen. It's those people who started off at a measured pace, continued at a measured pace, and finished at a measured pace, maybe a slight spurt toward the end. They had sufficient energy reserved to spurt toward the end. So all our activities, our whole life must be regulated, harmonized, and paced. And when we do this hand in hand with the divine, it becomes a delightful activity, a co-activity with this divine author of grace that supplies all of this, there being only one entity, this Purusha.